Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. What's up, everybody? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 149. In this episode, I interview Paul from Wake and Bake with Paul. He is a Synganic gardener who grows in his garage, which brings its own unique set of challenges. He gets into detail on the way he does it successfully, everything from equipment setup, balancing the environment's conditions, preventing pests, and so much more. If you want to see short clips of these podcast episodes, search Garden Talk Clips on YouTube. I also have a gardening channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who helped make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their electric sprayers with a 2-liter capacity and an adjustable nozzle that can go from a strong jet to a fine mist spray. Their sprayers are battery powered and can be used for 3 hours on a full charge. No pumping required, and it's a one-button operation. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their sprayers, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Stash Blend consists of several ingredients in one, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. It includes corn steep liquor, seaweed extract, humic acid, beneficial bacteria, silica, and mycorrhizal fungi. It can be used in addition to your synthetic base nutrients or be used in living soil systems. Simply mix it into water and water your plants with it. You can get it at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. And we are back, and I'm joined with Paul from Wake and Bake with Paul. How you doing today?
Not bad. How are you? Pleasure being here.
Good, man. Thanks for asking. Today we're going to talk all about growing plants in a garage. And I feel like this is something that a decent amount of people do, grow in a garage, because they can't within their house for whatever reason, right? Maybe they don't have space in their house or whatever. But it's really a topic that we haven't gotten into much in any of these podcast episodes. Growing in a garage really comes with its own unique set of challenges, which we're going to get into. I feel like even if you don't grow in a garage, there will still be some takeaways in this episode. So don't go anywhere if you see the topic and want to run here. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into gardening?
Sure. So, like you said, my name's Paul. Mid-40s guy out here in Southern California, Los Angeles. I'm in the Valley. I've been married for 20 years. Actually, my anniversary was 2 weeks ago, so congrats to my wife. She stuck around. 4 kids, and I've been a garage grower for the past 4+ years. Grew up a farmer's kid, so spent a lot of time in the fields when I was young, up towards early adult. But my father had a vineyard and an almond farm, so spent a lot of time out in the field. So kind of was introduced to farming, gardening at a young age, and a lot of that kind of translated into kind of what you see behind me is the garage grow.
Awesome. And then another question I like to ask in the beginning is, what's your grow style? I mean, I know you're indoors in a garage. Are you in soil, coco, hydroponics? Are you using organic or synthetic inputs? What's your style?
So, I have a grow tent. I have 3 grow tents in the garage. I'm a farmer's kid, so I kind of reverted to soil. It's what I'm comfortable with. And I guess it's the common phrase these days is Synganic. So I like to give, the plants synthetic nutrients, but I also like to add, worm castings, and I also like to, feed in molasses from time to time, kind of help the root zone. So I guess that's what you kind of call Synganic.
And we'll get deeper into nutrients, how you use them, what you use throughout the whole grow cycle later on in the episode. First, I do want to dive into you explaining your garden setup that's in your garage. Now, you already mentioned you have 3 grow tents in there. What do you have for lighting, and how do you do ventilation, and so on and so forth? Explain your grow setup.
So this one to my side this way, this is a AC Infinity 3x3. I got the complete setup with the controller, which, it's hands down, it's fantastic. I mean, it kind of, I don't want to use the word boring, but it really helps regulate so much of the environment that it becomes almost hands off. This one behind me is a competitor. I'm not going to name any names, but at some point I want to upgrade. I'm just, the light is pretty good, but I've really never been a fan of their tents. Truthfully, in their customer service, one time they told me to sew something on a defect, and I was just kind of shocked. But thankfully, AC Infinity's not like that. And then I've got one over here on the side that's a bit of a reject tent. I kind of picked up as something I needed, but the light in there it's the Green Sunshine Company, the Electric Sky 180 V3, which I still love that light. You know what I mean? I think it works great. So it's hard to part ways with that one. So I might upgrade the tent and the ventilation, but I still want to use that light. Ventilation. I've got fans inside there, lots of air circulation, and I've got an intake fan for all of them, as well as an exhaust. So lots of air circulation. And there's some things I do to just make sure that I keep things clean as well. But that's the setup I have right now. Kind of a variety of companies when it comes to the other. The last one, the one behind me, it's all competitor stuff.
You got 3 different tents there. Are you doing like perpetual grow? Is that why you have 3 different tents, or is it just so you can grow a certain number of plants, or what's the reason for the 3 different tents?
Oh, you're exactly right. I'm a perpetual grower. I kind of have, different plants in different life cycles, just so so there's always a surplus, but just to kind of keep things going. Plus, I like to play. It's, having, the right amount of plants in one tent or something like that is just, gardening's fun, right? So you want to play games, you want to try different things, and you want to kind of enjoy yourself. And so if it's just all in one, it kind of makes it a little bit boring. So I kind of like to, the perpetual grow, but also kind of diversify and just kind of, do different things at different times with different plants. So
now, are you on like a strict schedule for your perpetual to where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this number of weeks in veg, then I'm going to flip that to flower, and then so you've got everything kind of rotating evenly, or you just kind of like wing it?
My jars are full. So to simply put it, you know what I mean? Like I've got plenty. So like right now, the 3x3 has one plant in it, and it's in a solo cup. It's the Global Grow Cup. So I devoted, that entire plant, that entire setup to that bonsai tree of a plant that's sitting in there right now. You know what I mean? And, this one's got a good amount of clones. And then the one over there in the corner it's a Gary Payton that's kind of later stages of flowering. So it's in a scrock. So it takes up the entire tent. You know what I mean? So it's a variety, I play.
Understood. So in your grow tents where your plants are growing, what environment conditions do you typically aim for?
So I guess with that, you've got your optimum, my basis typically, I go off of VPD, and not strictly, but you kind of, once you kind of get an understanding of the variations that you're looking for, you kind of need to, where the relative humidity needs to be in contrast to, the heat in the, I'm in SoCal, so the heat typically in the tents, right? But, there's optimum conditions, and I think there's realistic conditions, and then there's getting by conditions. Actually, when we met, when you were here in Southern California, that couple of weeks was, horrible. Simply put, the weather was just horrible. It was, I'm in my garage, and it's 10 p.m. and it's like 95 degrees outside, and you're just thinking like, oh my gosh. But at the end of the day, the plants are really resilient. You know what I mean? They can handle a lot. Sometimes you open the tent and it's hot in there and the humidity's low and the plants are praying. You know what I mean? They're just loving life. And you're like, okay, you know what I mean? You tough little critters. You know what I mean? So you guys are doing pretty good. But, I like to be, again, I base off of VPD. You know what I mean? I think one of the important things is just to make sure that you've got a good functioning humidifier. You know what I mean? Just so you're kind of always keeping that up, because in my experiences, when it's really hot, if you can increase the humidity, it decreases the general temperature in the environment, right? So I think, that's really helpful. And actually, one of the ideas that I had sent AC Infinity, because I do the entire grow in the tent, right? I do the, from seedling all the way. Well, I use a dome for the seedling, but when they're little dinks to where I'm harvesting and cutting down, it's all in the grow tent, right? So, one of the wish list items that I had sent AC Infinity was, hey, it would be great if on the automation there was a notifier that, when your humidity is low, the water in the humidifier is low, so it tells you, hey, go fill it up again. You know what I mean? Because you never want to run out if you're if you're drying or something like that, in a dry environment, you don't want to run out of, water in the humidifier, right? So I think it's important. I have another one that'll tell me when it's empty, but that's typically too late. So a warning sign would be magnificent. But that's the environment I'm typically looking for. It's during the colder months, it's usually, 50s to 70s in the garage. Hotter months, it could be 70s to 90s in the garage. So, typically in the tent, it's a little bit cooler. And then I've got some things that I use, such as what's really important to me is an external AC unit that actually also has a dehumidifier in it, as a means of being able to push in colder air when I need to. And I have a method of doing that as well, but it's important to me. I think we'll talk about it later, but I mean, if you're going to invest and you're in a warm climate, something you need, especially if you're going in the garage, you need to be able to combat the heat.
And so you mentioned you track after VPD. Do you happen to know, like, for KPA, do you measure by that? Do you use that? And do you kind of have it in mind, like, okay, for this stage of growth, I'm going to aim for this KPA, veg, flower, and so on and so forth? Do you have those numbers? So you're just looking at a chart?
I use, there's some convenient things that I use. There's an app on my phone. It's like Dr. Greenhouse, I believe it's called, VPD calculator. So basically you punch in, the temperature, and then you also punch in the relative humidity, and it kind of tells you where you are. As far as, if it's either humid, it'll tell you if it's dry stress, or it'll tell you if it's in optimum flowering conditions, or if it's in optimum vegetative conditions. So you kind of get used to it. So, it typically is like a 15-point difference between the temperature and the humidity for flower. And then for veg is typically about like 8. You know what I mean? So if it's 80 degrees in the tent, you're probably looking at like 72% relative humidity, and that'll kind of put you in a good spot for veg. You know what I mean? So I'm no pro and I'm no scientist. I kind of go off of, experience, I guess. You kind of know what temperature, if it's at this temperature, I should probably be at this humidity. You know what I mean? So, and then at the same time, you have built-in trust with the automation and controls, so they're doing their job too, which is really convenient.
Got it. Yeah. And when I'm in seedling and veg, I'm usually aiming for like a 0.8 to 1.1 kPa. And then for flower, just like typically about 1.2 to 1.5, sometimes upwards of 1.6 kPa. But according to the Pulse VPD charts, that's kind of the optimal range. And then, a lot of people think that they need to just be in that range and that's it. They have to. If they're outside of it, they're screwed, which really isn't the case, right? Like the plants will still grow. It just might not be that optimal growth according to VPD. But I totally get what you mean by like having the experience and knowing, okay, I'm at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. I know I need to be between this and this percent relative humidity. You kind of get that feeling. And most people that are just using temperature and humidity, a lot of people really are falling within that optimal VPD range without even knowing it. So yeah, I just figured I'd throw that one out there.
Well, at the same time, you see plants outside. You have plants outside and it's 110 degrees outside and the relative humidity is 27 degrees, or percent, I should say. And the plants are all doing just fine. You know what I mean? So it's like, again, there's optimum conditions and there's realistic. I really try to fall into the realistic. Sometimes you just can't get there. You know what I mean? If it's just too hot out, or if it's just too cool. If it's too dry, you can combat that with a humidifier. But again, like you said, most people just, it falls within the range of acceptable, right? The plant's it's dealing with it. And sometimes you kind of think maybe the stress is helping the plant with its trichome production and some of that stuff too. You know what I mean? Instead of it being a perfect lifestyle for them.
Good point. So that's inside your grow tent. Now, how about your lung room, or really the room that your grow tents are in, which is your garage? Are you aiming for a certain temperature and humidity in your garage so that way any air coming into your grow tents are of the proper temp and RH, or what?
That's a great question. This is my lung room is my man cave. You know what I mean? So behind me is my grow area. Over here to my side is, a kind of a bench with a laptop. My whole, when I'm working from home, that's where I'm working. And in front of me is my TV. So when I'm watching you guys on your podcast, you on your podcast or some of these other guys, it's all right here. So typically my garage is open and I'm hanging out in here and I'm again, I'm in SoCal. So typically the weather's pretty nice. You've got your hot time and you've got your cool time, but we don't get the 4 seasons like some of these other places where people are growing. So it's oftentimes tolerable. If it's too hot out, the garage is closed and I'm hanging out inside a closed garage. If it's just right, the garage is open. And, again, there's a couple things that I do, whether it's, using the external AC unit if I need to help push in cold air if it's really hot out, you know what I mean? Even if the garage is closed and it's still hot out, I'll hook up ducting from the AC unit, straight from the AC unit to where, it kind of opens up like this. I'll shove the ducting and I'll shove it in there and I'll tape it on there so it doesn't fall out. And then I'll run that duct hose straight into the intake fan of my, of the grow tent. So it's just pushing cold air right into there, right? So you just have to make sure the filter on your external AC unit's always clean. So it's pushing, cleaner air. But I mean, if you're looking for a way to decrease the internal temperature of your grow tent versus outside by up to 15, 20 degrees, you're just pushing in cold air, I'm fortunate. My garage actually has a spot that's got a external, like a kind of where air can exhaust. So I've actually taped the exhaust from the AC unit straight there. So it's pushing all that hot air right out of my garage. So I can run the AC unit with my garage closed and it's ventilating the hot air out and it's pushing the cool air right into my tent. So it's really helpful. Depending on the climate you're at, you're in Vegas. For any of the people out in Vegas growing in their garage, you need an AC unit in there, or else it gets hot in there. It becomes a scorcher, so you got to have something. The plants will be happy, but come on, make their lives a little bit easier, right? So that's my lung room.
Yeah, I have a couple buddies who grow in the garage. I'm based in Las Vegas, the desert, and summertime, it's from June, July, August, just about every day is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which I did the conversion here because I didn't want to leave out the folks that's using Celsius, but over 37 degrees Celsius. And that's pretty hot here. And sometimes it reaches up to 110 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And my buddies that are growing in the garage out here, they have, like you said, they have an air conditioner literally right in their garage. And so they're cooling that air. Now, on the flip side, when you're in the wintertime, it gets very cold. So they actually have to heat the place. Do you have to use a heater at all in the wintertime to kind of heat up your garage so the grow space inside your grow tents, for example, doesn't get too cold?
Yeah. I get inventive, with the AC unit, I'll shove, because I've got the 3 tents, I'll shove 3 duct hoses in kind of in a line like this. And it's just running to all 3 tents simultaneously, which is pretty cool. So it's a 3-in-1. And for, I've got like a space heater, those, just $50 space heater. And I've actually I grabbed a tote and I kind of enclosed it in the tote standing vertically. And I ran the 3 duct hoses in there, kind of trapping the heat in that area as best as I could. So the intake fan was just sucking in warm air from there. And, that proved to be successful as well. Because you're, again, if you've got multiple tents and you want to buy 3 space heaters and throw them each one in a tent, which sometimes is too strong and it gets too warm in there because it's right on them. You know what I mean? But if you're running the intake fan, oftentimes it's got the adjuster on it, right? So if it's pulling too much or too little, you can adjust that. But I've used a big tote that I got from Home Depot, put the, kind of leaned it against the space heater against the wall, and then I had the 3 duct hoses going in there and just sucking the hot air right from that area. And it helped warm the entire, I might be cold where I'm at because I want the heater on me, but my tents are thriving with the right temperature. So that external help, in my opinion, is really important if you're in the garage, whether it's that outside AC unit that's going to help cool the tents, and also the dehumidifier, which is fantastic when it comes to drying, but and also just a quality space heater that you could use. If you got one tent, you could either kind of hose it in or whatever. I'm not big on putting the heater right in the tent, depending on how much room you've got, especially if it's going to be right next to one of your plants. So I kind of like it to come from the intake fan. I'm just a fan of that.
That's an interesting way to go about it, having it duct directly into the grow tents, the way that you're doing it. There's different ways to go about it, right? Like you could just do it passively and just grab what's coming in from your garage, for example. But that might not be as good as the way that you're doing it. Now, a follow-up question I have for you is, do you also have the rectangle intake vents open as well, or you only have the hoses hooked up to the ventilation socks?
I don't have them open. If the weather's perfect, the fan is just kind of sitting on top of the tent, right? And one of the things that I do to kind of, I like to cover it with pantyhose. The intake fan, if it's sitting there by itself, I'll cover it with pantyhose as a really good method to kind of filter out stuff. And it'll kind of blow your mind, because if you clean it weekly, you spack it against something, the amount of filth that just bounces out of there is disturbing, but at the same time kind of refreshing, because you're like, wow, this would have all gotten sucked right into the grow tent and just been part of that environment. You know what I mean? But that's why I was saying clean the filter on the AC unit if you're going to duct it that way, because you're trying to make sure that anything going in your tent is, I guess, as filtered as you can. If you're not using like a carbon filter or something like that as an intake to kind of bring in clean air that way. But most people these days kind of use the carbon filter to kind of kill the smell, right? So it's usually the exhaust that it's connected to. So
good tips. I know we spent a long time here on just the environment conditions and how to balance them and stuff like that, but I feel like it's kind of an important thing to talk about when you're growing in a garage, because it's so different. It can be so different, or it can be similar to growing inside of a house. But for most people, I feel like it's got its own unique challenges when it comes to environment. But let's move on to other parts of the grow. Let's get into some basics. What do you typically use for container size and type? And I think you mentioned you're in soil, right? What's in your mix?
So containers, when they're seedlings, actually I kind of like to use clear solo cups that I put inside of a colored solo cup, because it helps you kind of look at the roots. You kind of know what's going on down there, and it's a really kind of a cool cheat code when you're growing. So, but I start off in a solo cup, clear in a colored one, and then if I'm going straight into the final resting place, the home that it's going to be in, I'll go into a fabric pot. But if I'm going to transfer up to it, I'll go from plastic and then the final one is a fabric one, just because transplanting is a heck of a lot easier pulling it out of a plastic pot versus a fabric one, because those roots like to kind of dig into the fabric ones, right? So it can be kind of chaotic to get them out of there. As far as a mix, soil. So I like to use, typically my mix is 1/3 Happy Frog from Fox Farms, and then 2/3 Ocean Forest, and then within that I like to add worm castings. I used to add perlite, but I feel like Fox Farms has enough in there to it aerates just fine, I think, in my opinion. But I used to add perlite, but I don't do that anymore. So it's just really, it's 1/3 Happy Frog, 2/3 Ocean Forest, and some worm castings.
Nice. And did you mention, I think I might have missed it, what container size those fabric pots are?
Oh, sorry. Container size, it varies. Typically, if I'm kind of doing a simple, like a pheno hunt or something like that, I'll throw them into 2-gallon pots, just so, kind of maximize the room. But typically I kind of stick to the 3 to 5 range, depending on what I'm, how big I'm really trying to get them. But if you're in a tent, they're going to get so big, in my opinion, you don't really need to get bigger than a 5-gallon pot, unless you're trying to grow a monster in a 5x5 or something like that. But, I think 3 gallons is convenient. 5 gallons is convenient. I was actually asking myself the other day, I'm like, I wonder why they don't make 4-gallon, because they make 1, 2, 3, and 5, but they don't make 4, which could be even convenient too. But I'm usually between 3 and 5. If there was a 4, I'd probably buy a 4. That's just me though.
Yeah, when organic growing up, it's the same as you, either a 3-gallon or 5-gallon. Sometimes I like to just be in the 5 because, well, mostly just for watering purposes. If I'm hand watering, the 5-gallon is going to need to be watered a little bit less than the 3-gallon, for example. So that's the only reason why I would really choose a 5 over a 3 when I'm organic gardening. Okay, so you mentioned your mix: 1/3 Happy Frog, 2/3 Ocean Forest, and then some worm castings. Now, eventually those nutrients are going to deplete and you're going to need to add in some more nutrition. When do you typically start your first feeding? What does it consist of? And then, yeah, if you could walk us through kind of the remaining life cycle and how you do your feedings.
I it depends on how the plant vigor when I start. Like if they're thriving and they're growing, probably I don't know. After I've transplanted them from like the solo cup into a bigger home, I guess you can say. I'd say probably 3 weeks, something like that. I think the nutrients in the soil they last a pretty good amount of time. So typically about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not heavy on the feed, so I don't try to kind of push too much on them. And in my past, what I give has shown me success. So probably about 2 to 3 weeks. As far as did you ask what I give? What do I use?
Yeah, what do you use for nutrient lineup?
So I'm a kind of a creature of habit. So when I first started, a lot of the information I got was from a friend of mine that was growing it home out in Central California, more on a grander scale for businesses. And he introduced me to a company called Veg Plus Bloom. They're out in San Diego, and they have a Part A and a Part B. They've got a foliar spray as well as something they call Life, which is their version of the mycorrhizae. But I've been using them for since I started, and I do add some bloom additives and such during flower. But when they're seedlings, I typically give them RO water with some seaweed extract. Kind of helps. I think it helps to just helps get them started. I think as far as like root development, things like that. And then once they're in veg, typically if I'm looking at ppm, it's right around like the 500 range. With the Part A that I give, unless I give molasses, that usually makes the ppm I think skyrocket if I'm not mistaken. But during veg, I just give the Part A. I add some CalMag here and there. I like to add silica. I think it helps with just making the plant just more sturdy as far as branches and just being able to carry some weight later on, right? So I like to add silica. And then once I've kind of gotten into flower, you keep everything that I had before. I include molasses. I like to include microorganisms, so some microbial inoculant as well to kind of just make sure that the root zone is active and breaking down certain things and giving the plant the opportunity to uptake the nutrients that it needs. But that's when I add the flowering part of Veg Plus Bloom. And then I also like to add some bloom boosters just to kind of help stack. I'm not always convinced that those things are working or the brands that I'm using are the best when it comes to that. So I'm kind of looking at, again, it's tough for me to make changes when it comes to the nutrient lines because, what I've used has shown me success, but I don't know if I can get better, right? So you kind of have that in the back of your mind. I've got this, which was sent to me, and I've got to work that into my system. It's just like I've got this mental block when it comes to switching up nutrients. I'm like, come on, Paul, you got from the stash, man. They sent it to you. Use the damn thing. But I gotta work it into my regimen. You know what I mean? It's just funny how people become, I like to experiment on one end when it comes to like plant training and things like that. But when it comes to like the nutrients that I give, I'm very simple. I mean, to the point where, I don't measure ppm anymore because I know this is what I give my plants. And I've measured it in the past like a rocket scientist. You're writing down exactly what you're giving. And, I used to even measure the ppm. Like I'd add CalMag and then I'd add, that nutrient and then I'd mix it up and then I'd check the ppm and then I'd add the other things and I'd start writing everything down. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I kind of know where all this lies at this point. I had 2 scoops of the nutrient of the Part A, and then I had 1 scoop of the Part B, and I had 5 milliliters of this, and then it just at some point where the ppm lies, right? But that's kind of where I'm at, Great white when I'm doing transplants, always helpful, as far as just dumping it on there on the roots, helps with the development of the transplant, so you don't get any transplant shock. So. Call it simple, but I have my routine, I guess.
Yeah, I see that bag of stash blend behind you, and I was wondering when you're gonna talk about that and incorporate that into, because you'll be able to cut out some of those bottles, like you mentioned, using seaweed and the microbial inoculant and silica. I mean, that's all located in stash blends. So I'd be interested to see if you incorporate that in and be able to cut out some bottles and save some money. That's one of the whole reasons why we put together that blend.
Well, you know what I'm going to do? So when we met at Growers Gauntlet, you actually gave me a pack of Chill Out OG. So
Yeah.
I'm going to grow those. I'm going to grow those, and I'm going to use the stash. So I'm going to break myself in and force it upon me to do what I got to do to change that habit. But I'll post updates. You'll see them. It'll be and I'll use the good old AC Infinity setup here to make sure that it's all perfect conditions. But I gotta break myself here.
Awesome. I'll definitely be keeping my eye out for that one for sure. Now, you mentioned you're using the Veg Plus Bloom. I've actually heard about that company quite a long time ago. Now, do you follow their feeding chart at a full dose, or some folks will start with like a half dose, for example?
You know, if I remember correctly, they're looking for a little bit more than what I'm putting in. But I think I don't need to. Again, I think that, when it comes to, harvesting medicinal plants, I get what I'm looking for in them, whether it's the flavor, the aroma, the effects, I guess you can say, right? So I don't give the full dose. Again, I stick to what I do, and my ppms. Again, I think it's molasses, right? That when you add that to your water, it's the ppm spikes pretty high. I think it was molasses, but my ppm typically does not exceed like 700 on any given feeding. So it's, in my opinion, pretty medium to low.
Okay. And then I think you mentioned that RO water, is that what we're using for a water source? And then if it is, how do you go about the watering throughout the grow cycle?
So I'm fortunate to have an RO thing built into my kitchen tap here. But at the same time, sometimes when you're trying to pour like 5 gallons from that thing, it doesn't give you what you need, right? So I'll get what I can. And then my family yells at me because they can't get new water. So then I go in hiding. But my tap is not so bad. So it kind of runs at like, I think 220 to 240 ppm, which is reasonable, right? It's not so bad. So, I'll use that water too. But, what I'll typically do is I'll pour it into like a big container type thing, and I'll let it sit for, a good day or so to let the chlorine and whatever else is in there kind of dissipate and leave. And then I use something called drops of balance, which, maybe we could talk about later, but it helps clean the water as well and it helps in a variety of ways. But I like to water by hand. So, whether it's using a bottle, you know what I mean? Or a hand pump if it's hard to reach, but I kind of like getting in there. It forces you to kind of get up in the plants and really get a good look at them. And so I don't mind, and typically if I'm going to travel or something like that, I plant my, you can kind of play games with your watering cycle. So you could push it one more day so you could then water one more day later, down the road or whatever. And then that, okay, I'm going to be gone for 3 days. So if I water them now, by the time I get back, they'll be perfect. They'll want water again or feeding again, but they're not going to dry out, so I coordinate myself on that, but I like to hand water. It's a good excuse to really kind of get up in there and see what's going on,
Yeah, you mentioned the RO system under the sink, and I have the same thing and same problem where my fiance is like, "Oh, you used up all the water." And what I've done is I have individual water jugs that I use now, so 1 gallon jugs, and I just fill those up, and I have a whole line of them right outside of my grow room. I'm stockpiling water a little bit, so I try to avoid running out of water at the tap there. But the RO system, for those that are kind of interested, is a little bit of a misconception. People say, "Oh, they're too expensive. They're thousands of dollars for a system," which isn't true. There are systems that I think I paid $250 for mine, $250 for mine, and it's a 1-to-1. So technology getting a little more efficient here. Before it was 1-to-3. So for every 1 gallon of RO water, you'd be wasting 3 gallons. Well, now with the one I have is a 1-to-1. It's called the APEC ROES-100. It's an Essence series. It was called. I just pulled it up right here. For every 1 gallon of RO water, you're only wasting 1 gallon of water. And you can take that waste line, they call it. You can take that and put it into your own 5-gallon bucket, for example, and use it on something else. Use it on your house plants, Some people use it outdoors. So figure I'd mention that stuff that, yeah, RO water isn't as expensive as some may say it is, and it doesn't waste as much as it used to.
Oh yeah, the efficiency of those things is it's gotten much better. That's for sure. So exactly when you're looking, that's probably one of the key things you're looking for is what is the efficiency, right? Because they're all around that 200 plus, like right in that range, right? $200 to $300 these days. So it's which one is the most effective one and least wasteful, I guess, right? So
For sure. And directly relating to water, let's get into pH. Do you monitor the pH at all?
yeah, that's one thing that I do religiously. I like to kind of keep it in the range of typically I'd say 6.0 to 6.4. My sweet spot is typically around 6.2, but I kind of do like them to fluctuate between 6.1 to 6.3. If it's anywhere in that range, I'm fine. One thing I want to do more frequently is check the pH of the runoff, just to kind of see where that sits, because it's a pretty good indicator of kind of am I kind of what is it looking like there? You know what I mean? I know what's going in, but how's it looking coming out? Kind of tells you what the kind of what's being held up in the medium, right? So it's something that I should be looking at more frequently. That and probably checking the ppm of my runoff too, just to kind of see where that's at.
Got it. And then you mentioned that you monitor ppm. I know some people do ppm, some people do EC instead. For ppm, I caught that you do 500 ppm for veg. What do you typically go up to in flowering?
It doesn't typically exceed 750. Some of the bloom additives that when you include them, whether it's Big Bud or there's a Grow Tech Monster Bloom, I realize the ppm doesn't increase significantly when I add those to my nutrients. So it doesn't. I don't see it get past 750. So it's not too, back in the, when I first learned from my friend, saying pushing 1400 ppm on with certain things and all the time. And I realized, I'm giving half of that now. And I think the quality of, my finished product is significantly better. So, at the end of the day, while most companies probably are being as truthful as they can be, but they're not going to tell you to use this much, because then the product's going to sit there on your shelf forever, right? So they probably want you to kind of get through it fairly quickly. So they're probably telling you what you should use at a maximum is their minimum. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, this is what you need to use because they want you to kind of come back. But I could be way off, but what I do know is I give a fraction of what I've been told to, and it comes out just fine. Again, plus, if you're transplanting and you're putting fresh soil, you're taking this and you're putting it into something here, all this additional soil that you've added into your pot is new and it's filled with nutrients again. So you're kind of re-upping what was depleted earlier to, it's right back in the mix again, right? So in my opinion, you don't always need to be pushing them so hard.
Is that ppm numbers that you're giving, is that the ppm of the nutrient solution going into the soil, or is that a runoff measurement?
That's going into the soil.
Glad I clarified that, because I think some people might be thinking that was the runoff number. So, okay, so that's the measurement going in.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I want to switch over now to another thing that could be more of a problem in a garage than it is just fully indoor, which is pests. What do you typically do in order to prevent pests when growing in your garage?
So there's a couple things. Since my garage is typically open, I know that I get a fresh dose of dust and stuff frequently, right? So you've got to keep not only the inside of the environment clean at all times, but you've also got to work on keeping the outside of the environment as clean as you can too, right? So I think first and foremost is be tidy, right? You're spending a lot of time and energy into these plants, and you don't want to be lazy on that end of things. So, keep clean. Inspect your plants frequently as well. Don't be too hands off. Really got to look close because, for those of you that have, Chris, I'm sure you've had pests in the past, but when you're looking at your flowers, if you're in flower, or even if you're in veg, you're appreciating the flower and you're looking at it. But when you've had pests in the past, you don't you realize your eyes are playing games on you now because you're kind of looking away from everything and you're looking deeper into things because you're trying to see movement or something that, a bug or something like that. And it's just annoying, right? So I try to be as preventative as possible, but some of the things I do, I'll add sticky traps. Sometimes I'll hang them outside of my tent and I'll put them inside the tent, even when I don't have a problem, because it might be an indicator of a problem on the horizon, right? So you don't need to have an issue to have a sticky trap kind of in your tent, right? If you want to take pictures, you could take them out and make the pictures look pretty again. But I think when you're not taking any pictures or videotaping or something like that, leave one in there. What's the harm, right? I mentioned earlier, I like if my intake fans aren't being ducted with like AC or heater, I like to put pantyhose over them, just on the cover. And it really is a fantastic way of letting air flow in still, but really acting as a pretty darn good screen to kind of keep that dust and different types of sediment or whatever it might be outside of your plant, right? So there's lots of proactive measures you can do to make sure that you're not getting any infestation, because when it happens, it's frustrating, and then you've got to play the reactive game, and it's no fun.
Are you doing any like sprays or anything in like the veg stage to prevent pests?
What do people use? Like dish soap and water? I think, I might want to look into using that in the future. I do use, again, drops of balance. You can use that as a foliar spray, which helps. It helps really kind of, it's preventative in lots of ways. It helps prevent plants from intaking insecticides and things like that. But, I don't, aside from spraying that, I haven't really sprayed anything unless I've needed to. If I've had an infestation, then neem oil might come into play if I'm in veg. If I'm in flower, that's a different story, then you got different problems then.
Got it. Now, have you had any major infestations of any pests at all?
Thankfully, major, I wouldn't say no. Like I've seen pictures of spider mites and webs, and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's, that would be so disheartening. But, I've had problems with, white flies, fungus gnats, thrips, aphids, and, white flies are annoying. Looks like little dust flying around. They're really annoying, but they're not so hard to handle. They really are a sucker for the yellow sticky traps. So, those are really helpful for those, and fungus gnats, aphids and thrips are much more annoying. Actually, this one right here, I had noticed some damage from thrips recently, actually. So I had to, and thankfully they're in veg, so I was able to kind of, I haven't seen any lately, so thankfully I think I've beat them. But it's kind of a number of steps to take. That, again, when you're in veg, it's much easier. If you're in flower, I think, what I've done in the past, and, actually what I did with this one here, for starters, use neem oil, spray them with neem oil. Not a preferred thing, but it does help, right? Soak kind of the top layer of soil. And then I did a lot of visual killing, right? So you're just kind of, your eyes are all over your plants. You see a little bit of movement, you kill them. While I was doing that, I had ordered some ladybugs off of Amazon. So ladybugs are, plant warriors, right? They help us. They're not evil. They're what we want in our gardens. So ordered some from Amazon. Unfortunately, they showed up during that extreme heat wave that we had. So I think half of them were unfortunately deceased when I opened up the package they came in, but I let them fly in here and they did their thing for, I'd say a good week, just kind of let them take care of business. And then, it got to the point where I pulled each pot out and I made sure there was none on there, and they like to go underneath the fabric pot. So I knocked them off and put them outside. And then I gave it one more spray of neem oil, and then I used diatomaceous earth as a top layer, which is really great. It's also really annoying because it could be so messy. It's just white powder everywhere, right? So I top layered it, and just to make sure that if there was any larvae or whatever the middle stage of those things are called, people can't remember, but that this would help kill them. So I was using the neem oil for the plant itself. See if I can take care of whatever was on the plant still, if anything. And then the diatomaceous earth, I think, helped kill whatever was still in the soil. And then afterwards, I just watered over that, and thankfully, but now it's still little dust particles here and there. You're kind of staring at the plants, you see little white specks. You're like, what is that? And then you realize it's just diatomaceous earth, so you just kind of rub it out. You know what I mean? But thankfully, I think I've rid myself of that problem. So it's a couple steps. Hopefully your users get some information out of that. I know neem oil is a bit questionable, but you try to buy the one that's just, I think they sell organic versions or the diluted type or something, but it ultimately helps. You don't want to use that during flower, though. During flower, probably just want to go the diatomaceous earth on the soil and then let the ladybugs have at them. And then whatever you see with your eyes, just kill what you can, if it's something if it's a mild infestation. If it's heavy, you might have to just scrap it, depending on how bad it is.
Thanks for explaining that in detail. I know we have quite a few people that battle pests, and you definitely named off some good solutions there for people to try. Next, I want to get into misconceptions. What would you say are some misconceptions about growing in a garage?
You kind of hear different things from different people. I think that when it comes down to it, if you can control your environment, your garage is as good as a laboratory. You know what I mean? If it makes no difference. I think that if you have things dialed in right and you've got the right genetics, you can grow some high quality flower, medicinal flower, or flowers, tomatoes, whatever you want to call it, anything out, any vegetables in this environment, and I was fortunate enough to be part of a kind of an experiment where, I was able to, testing's it's expensive, and even those home testing kits are really pricey when it comes to medicinal plants. But I was fortunate enough to be part of an experiment where, what I grew here right behind me was sent to a lab and professionally tested. And, I'm not trying to toot my horn here, but, what I grew right behind me in a garage in Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, tested 30 plus in cannabinoids and, 28.1% THCA. So I was, I was happy. You kind of become proud. You're like, all right, you did pretty good, Paul. Not too bad. So I think the primary misconception is that this is not like an outhouse. You know what I mean? Like an outside, you're kind of, shunned and you got to grow in your garage. Like you can make it work here. There's some things that you might need to use that a traditional grower that's growing inside a air-conditioned, climate-controlled environment might not have to, or even in a bedroom or a bathroom, but you can make it work in the garage, that's for sure.
Good advice. And so we do have a lot of beginners that tune into this podcast. I want to ask you, for those folks that are beginners that are just getting started growing in a garage, what advice do you have for them?
I think the community is huge. I think there's no right way to grow plants, right? Plants kind of grow themselves and you're just kind of helping them along the way, right? So I think, tuning into, podcasts like this one right here, and then some of the other people out there like, CLTV, Northern Scrogger, the AC Infinity After Dark folks, you learn a lot from different people. There's a number of people, when I first started growing, you kind of feel like you're on your own little island, that you don't, your friends might not grow, so you don't have anyone much to talk to. And then I kind of saw the Instagram community and I was like, ooh, what's this? You know what I mean? And I, started linking with people from that community. And then I realized, wow, YouTube has so many cool things as far as like medicinal growing and things like that. And then I found Mr. Grow, and then I found people like Welcome to the Grow Tent and Rosa Green and, just a variety of these people. And then as time grew, some of these other people came in, and you just kind of see what works for you, right? You have to kind of come up with your own formula. You don't always have to scrub. You don't always have to top. You don't always have to do these different types of things that someone tells you need to do in order to grow, grade A medicinal flower, right? No, there's different methods that are going to work for everybody, and you just have to kind of dial in what's going to work best for you. And then go from there. And then another thing is, I know income and money is different for different people, right? So just don't voluntarily go cheap. You know what I mean? I'm not going to blame anyone for going economical, right? You kind of go with what works for you. But chances are, if you're going to buy some dinky thing off like Alibaba or something like that, I can guarantee you're going to upgrade it because it's not going to get you what you're looking for. So buy what's going to work best for you. You know what I mean? What you know is going to provide you the best environment, because you don't want to spend a little bit of money and then be able to grow something that's okay, right? But if you maybe saved a little bit more or whatever and put another $100, $150 or whatever it might be into something that's got environmental controls and something that's really going to help you just grow better, I just say just hold off, save another paycheck, do whatever you have to do, but don't go cheap. These cheap lights, cheap tents, cheap nutrients, cheap genetics. You're starting off on a kind of behind, right? You're kind of starting off at a negative, and you could be as good as you can be. You can only get so high. But I think if you've got the foundation of a good environment and good lights and good exhaust and good fans and all that stuff, it's just going to help you that much more, right? So call it a team game.
Well said. Well, we're getting towards the end of the episode here. Can you tell the listeners how they can find you and what you have upcoming in the future?
Yeah, so you can find me on primarily on Instagram. My handle's Wake and Bake with Paul. I just opened up a Facebook. It's really nothing, and I've got a dinky YouTube channel with that many followers. So it's not really anything. Right now, it's really my Instagram is where you can find me. And I think for future's sake, I'm going to be working on a couple of things. Some more breeding. I'm going to grow the Chill Out OG, and I've got something going called Cat Piss right now that I'm kind of looking. I'm trying to go back to that 90s funk, that stink that was out there from back in the day. I'm going to make an attempt to kind of find that. I'm going to keep working with Drops of Balance. I did an experiment with them a little while back where I had a control and an uncontrolled grow. And now I'm going to kind of focus on control all the time, and I'm going to add it in because it really kind of helped. At the end, it helped the terpene profile of what I had grown, which was pretty cool. Shameless plug, if you guys are looking for any Drops of Balance or anything from Perfect Gardens, DOB10, that's my discount code. But I stand behind that product. It was really cool. But I'm going to keep playing. I like to do different things. Something that my friend was showing me the other day is called electroculture, where he had sent a picture of somebody that had grown a plant with this huge copper wire. And I was like, what is that? And I just kind of Googled it. So for like $10, I bought something from Amazon. So it's like a copper thing that kind of grows with your plant. And apparently the energy in the air, it kind of goes through the copper wiring and it helps plants thrive apparently. But I'm going to keep doing some funny experiments that I like to do. I like to play with the plants. It's fun. It's a good time. It's a passion.
Awesome. I'll definitely have a link to Paul's Instagram down in the YouTube description section below. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, just search for him. You'll find him. Give him a follow if you're a fellow garage grower or getting into growing in your garage or just want to follow for fun experiments that he's doing. Also want to give a big shout out to our Patreon folks. Being scrolled on the screen right now, thank you. Keep the lights on going here in the studio. Everything from paying for the editor to the podcast virtual platform. 100% of the money that gets through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. So special thanks to you. Paul, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast today. It was great to meet you in person at the Growers Gauntlet. And really glad you decided to come on to the podcast here today and talk about growing in the garage. Hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Hey, thanks for having me. And, hopefully some of the growers got some information they might be able to use. But thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Absolutely. All right. Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.